What happens when one of Hollywood's most beloved stars comes face to face with a host who's completely lost his way? You won't believe what unfolds when Brad Pitt sits down for what was supposed to be a routine promotional interview, only to find himself in the middle of a verbal battlefield that would leave audiences stunned and social media ablaze. This is the story of how a simple late-night talk show appearance turned into one of the most explosive confrontations in television history, ending with security being called and a superstar storming off set in disgust. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when these two titans clash in ways nobody saw coming. Last night's episode of Jimmy Kimmel Live was supposed to be straightforward promotion for Brad Pitt's latest film, but what transpired instead was a masterclass in how quickly things can spiral out of control when egos collide and professionalism goes out the window. The tension was palpable from the moment Pitt walked onto that stage, and by the time the dust settled, we were witnessing one of the most uncomfortable moments in late-night television history. The evening started innocently enough, with Kimmel's typical monologue running longer than usual, filled with his signature political commentary that's become increasingly divisive among viewers. Behind the scenes, sources report that Pitt was already growing impatient, having been kept waiting in the green room for over 30 minutes past his scheduled interview time. When he finally made his entrance to thunderous applause from the studio audience, there was already an underlying current of frustration that keen observers could detect in his body language. Kimmel opened with his usual banter, but something felt off immediately. Instead of the warm, welcoming tone most guests receive, there was an edge to his voice that suggested he was already in combative mode. "So, Brad, you're here to talk about your new movie, but I have to ask, what's it like being one of the few actors in Hollywood who actually seems to have their life together these days?" The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon, and Pitt's smile faltered for just a moment before he recovered with practiced Hollywood grace. "Well, Jimmy, I think we're all just trying to do our best and tell stories that matter to people," Pitt responded diplomatically, but you could sense the wariness in his voice. He wasn't here for games, and Kimmel's opening salvo had already put him on edge. The audience seemed to pick up on the strange energy too, their laughter feeling forced and uncertain. Kimmel wasn't satisfied with the diplomatic response and pressed forward with increasing aggression. "Come on, Brad! Don't give me the PR answer. We both know there are plenty of people in this town who could learn a thing or two from you about handling controversy. Some of them even host their own shows." The self-deprecating comment was clearly meant to be disarming, but it came across as passive-aggressive and uncomfortable. Pitt shifted in his seat, his media training kicking in as he tried to steer the conversation back to safer ground. "I'm really just focused on the work, Jimmy. This film we made is something I'm incredibly proud of, and I think audiences are going to love it." But Kimmel wasn't having it, and what happened next would set the stage for everything that followed. "You know what I find interesting, Brad?" Kimmel leaned forward, his tone becoming more confrontational by the second. "You talk about being focused on the work, but you've been pretty vocal about certain political issues lately. Some might say you're using your platform in ways that not everyone appreciates." The studio audience grew noticeably quieter, sensing that this wasn't the playful back and forth they'd come to expect from celebrity interviews. Pitt's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and for the first time that evening, his Hollywood veneer began to crack. "I think artists have always had a responsibility to speak up about things that matter to them, Jimmy. That's nothing new." His voice remained controlled, but there was steel underneath those words that suggested he wasn't going to be pushed around by anyone, regardless of whose show he was on. The tension in the studio was becoming impossible to ignore, and what started as an awkward interview was rapidly transforming into something much more dangerous. Kimmel doubled down on his aggressive approach, seemingly oblivious to the discomfort rippling through his own audience. "But here's what I don't understand, Brad," he continued, his voice dripping with false concern. "You preach about responsibility and doing the right thing, But wasn't there a time when your own personal choices were making headlines for all? The wrong reasons. Glass houses and all that? The low blow landed exactly as intended, and the studio fell into an uncomfortable silence that seemed to stretch on forever. Pitt's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, the mask of Hollywood professionalism slipped completely. Jimmy, I came here to talk about my film and support the incredible cast and crew who worked on it. If you want to dig into personal matters, maybe we should talk about your own track record as a host. His voice was quiet, but there was venom in those words that made everyone in the studio sit up and take notice. The comment hit Kimmel like a physical blow, and his face flushed red with anger and embarrassment. Behind the cameras, producers were frantically gesturing, trying to signal for a commercial break, but Kimmel was too far gone to notice or care. My track record? At least I don't pretend to be something I'm not for the cameras, Brad. Some of us are honest about who we are. The accusation hung in the air like toxic smoke, and the audience's discomfort was now palpable. Honest? Pitt let out a bitter laugh that sent chills through everyone watching. Jimmy, you've built your entire career on tearing people down and hiding behind the excuse that it's all just comedy. But there's nothing funny about what you're doing right now. The words were delivered with surgical precision, each one designed to cut deep, and Kimmel's face contorted with rage as he realized he was losing control of his own show. What happened next would be talked about for years to come. Instead of trying to de-escalate or move to a commercial break, Kimmel leaned forward aggressively, pointing his finger directly at Pitt's chest. You know what your problem is, Brad? You think you're better than everyone else in this town. You walk around with your humanitarian awards and your perfect image. But we all know the real story, don't we? The accusation was vague but loaded, with implication, and it was clear that Kimmel was trying to provoke Pitt into saying something he'd regret. But Pitt wasn't taking the bait, at least not in the way Kimmel expected. Instead of exploding with anger, he became deadly calm, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. Jimmy, you're embarrassing yourself and everyone who works for you. This isn't entertainment, it's pathetic. The quiet dignity in his response made Kimmel's behavior look even more unhinged by comparison, and the cameras captured every moment of the host's obvious humiliation. The audience was now completely silent, transfixed by the train wreck unfolding before their eyes. Even the band seemed frozen in place, unsure whether they should intervene or simply witness history in the making. Kimmel's producers were making increasingly desperate gestures from the wings, but their attempts to salvage the situation were falling on deaf ears. Kimmel's next move crossed every line of professional courtesy and basic human decency. Standing up from behind his desk, he moved closer to Pitt's chair, invading his personal space in a way that felt genuinely threatening. You want to call me pathetic? Let's talk about pathetic, Brad. Let's talk about all the things you've done that your publicists have worked overtime to cover up. The threat was implicit, but unmistakable, and Pitt's entire demeanor shifted in response. For the first time that evening, genuine anger flashed across Pitt's face, and he slowly rose from his chair to face Kimmel directly. The two men stood barely, 3 feet apart, and the energy in the studio became electric with tension. Jimmy, you need to step back right now, Pitt said, his voice carrying a warning that would have been wise to heed. But wisdom had abandoned Kimmel completely, and what he did next would seal his fate and create one of the most shocking moments in television history. In a moment of complete recklessness, Kimmel reached out and actually placed his hand on Pitt's chest, pushing him slightly backward, while sneering, "What are you going to do about it, Brad? Walk off my show like some prima donna?" The physical contact was the final straw, and the entire studio gasped audibly as they realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. Security personnel began moving toward the stage, but they were too far away to intervene before the situation exploded completely. Pitt's reaction was immediate and decisive. He grabbed Kimmel's wrist and firmly removed his hand, stepping back with the controlled movements of someone who had reached their absolute limit. "Don't you ever put your hands on me again," he said, his voice carrying a quiet fury that was more intimidating than any shouting could have been. The cameras captured every moment of Kimmel's face as he realized he had gone too far. But instead of backing down, he doubled down on his aggressive behavior. "Oh, now you're going to threaten me on my own show?" Kimmel's voice cracked slightly, revealing the desperation underneath his bravado. "This is exactly what I'm talking about, Brad. The moment someone challenges your perfect image, you show your true colors." The accusation was delivered with such venom that even the studio crew looked uncomfortable, and several audience members began heading for the exits, sensing that something truly ugly was about to unfold. What happened next would be replayed millions of times across social media and dissected by entertainment journalists for weeks to come. Pitt took a step forward, closing the distance between them, and spoke in a voice that was calm, but carried the weight of absolute authority. "Jimmy, you've humiliated yourself, your staff, and everyone in this building tonight. You've crossed every line of professional conduct and basic human decency. I came here as a guest on your show, and you've treated me with nothing but disrespect and hostility from the moment I sat down." The words hit Kimmel like physical blows, and his face went through a series of expressions as he processed what was happening. The audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word, and even the cameramen seemed transfixed by the drama playing out before them. Kimmel's mouth opened and closed several times as he struggled to formulate a response, but Pitt wasn't finished delivering his devastating assessment. "You want to know what's pathetic, Jimmy? A grown man who thinks he can bully people because he has a television show. You've forgotten that hosting isn't about tearing people down. It's about entertaining your audience and treating your guests with respect. You've failed at both tonight." Each word was delivered with surgical precision, and Kimmel visibly flinched as the criticism hit home. But instead of accepting the justified rebuke, Kimmel's ego drove him to make one final catastrophic mistake. "You sanctimonious piece of—" he began, but Pitt cut him off before he could finish the insult that would have destroyed whatever remained of his reputation. "That's enough," Pitt said, raising his hand to stop Kimmel mid-sentence. "I'm done. Here. This isn't entertainment, it's a circus, and I won't be part of it anymore." He began removing his microphone, and the sound of the clip being unhooked echoed through the silent studio like a gunshot. Kimmel, realizing that his show was falling apart in real time, made one last desperate attempt to regain control. "You can't just walk off my show. We're in the middle of a live broadcast." His voice was high and strained, revealing the panic that was setting in as he watched his carefully constructed image crumble before millions of viewers. Pitt paused in removing his microphone and looked directly into Kimmel's eyes with the expression of pure disgust. "Watch me," he said simply, and those two words carried more power than any lengthy speech could have. The finality in his voice made it clear that there would be no coming back from this moment, no apologies or reconciliation that could repair the damage that had been done. The studio erupted into chaos as Pitt handed his microphone to a stunned production assistant and began walking toward the exit. Kimmel stood frozen behind his desk, his face a mask of shock and humiliation, as he realized that his career might have just ended in front of a live television audience. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every moment of the host's complete breakdown, as his guest walked away with dignity intact, leaving behind a wake of destruction that would reverberate through the entertainment industry for months to come. As Pitt strode toward the stage exit with purposeful steps, the audience began to react. What started as stunned silence quickly transformed into something unprecedented in late-night television history. One by one, audience members began to stand and applaud. Not the polite, orchestrated applause typical of a talk show, but genuine, thunderous approval for what they had just witnessed. They were applauding Pitt's refusal to be bullied, his defense of basic human dignity, and his decision to walk away rather than participate in Kimmel's toxic behavior. The applause grew louder and more sustained as Pitt reached the edge of the stage and he paused for just a moment to acknowledge the audience with a simple nod. In that gesture, he communicated more grace and professionalism than Kimmel had shown in the entire disastrous interview. The contrast was stark and undeniable, captured in high definition for millions of viewers who were already beginning to flood social media with their reactions. Kimmel, meanwhile, seemed to shrink behind his desk as the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. His producers were frantically trying to salvage the situation, signaling for the band to play and the cameras to cut away, but the damage was already done. The host, who had built his career on making others uncomfortable, had finally pushed too far, and the consequences were playing out in real time before a live audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, Brad Pitt," Kimmel called out desperately, his voice cracking as he tried to regain some semblance of control. But his words fell flat in the wake of what everyone had just witnessed. The audience's applause for Pitt continued, even as he disappeared backstage, while Kimmel was left to face the crushing silence that followed. The show's producers finally managed to cut to a commercial break, but the damage was irreversible. Within minutes, clips of the confrontation were spreading across every social media platform, with viewers expressing their shock and disgust at Kimmel's behavior. The hashtags "Respect Brad Pitt" and "Kimmel crossed the line" began trending worldwide as people shared their reactions to the unprecedented meltdown they had just witnessed. When the show returned from commercial, Kimmel attempted to continue with his remaining segments, but his heart clearly wasn't in it. His usual swagger was gone, replaced by a nervous energy that betrayed how shaken he was by the encounter. The studio audience, many of whom had witnessed the confrontation firsthand, remained subdued and unresponsive to his attempts at humor. Behind the scenes, the fallout was immediate and severe. Network executives were in emergency meetings before the show even ended, trying to assess the damage and determine how to respond. Entertainment journalists were already crafting headlines about the most shocking moment in late-night television history, while social media influencers and celebrities began weighing in with their own reactions to what they had seen. The overnight ratings told the story in stark numbers, while the confrontation itself drew massive viewership as word spread across social media. The audience hemorrhaged immediately afterward. Viewers who had tuned in to witness the drama quickly tuned out once Pitt left, leaving Kimmel to finish his show to the smallest audience he had seen in years. By morning, the entertainment industry was buzzing with reactions to the previous night's events. Fellow celebrities began speaking out in support of Pitt's decision to walk off the show, praising his professionalism and dignity in the face of Kimmel's aggressive behavior. Several A-list stars announced they would be reconsidering their own scheduled appearances on the show, citing concerns about the host's conduct. The incident became a defining moment that highlighted everything wrong with certain corners of the entertainment industry. Kimmel's behavior represented the worst impulses of celebrity culture, where hosts feel entitled to humiliate their guests for the sake of ratings and viral moments. Pitt's response, by contrast, demonstrated that true star power comes from maintaining one's dignity and principles, even in the face of provocation. In the weeks that followed, Kimmel's ratings plummeted as advertisers began pulling their support and A-list guests canceled their appearances. The confrontation had exposed something ugly about his hosting style that viewers could no longer ignore, and the industry response was swift and decisive. What had started as a routine promotional interview had become a career-defining moment that would be remembered long after both men had left the public eye. The Brad Pitt incident became a cautionary tale about the importance of professionalism and respect in the entertainment industry, proving that even the most established hosts are not immune to the consequences of their actions when they cross the line from entertainment into harassment and abuse.